In the sprawling archives of the Galactic Archives, located on the crystalline moon of Kepler Station, there existed a chamber of restricted footage. For 317 standard cycles, the footage had remained sealed behind titanium doors and encryption protocols that required the authorization of the High Council themselves. But on this particular day, in the prestigious halls of the Kethra Institute for Advanced Studies, the most elite academy in the known galaxy, a group of young alien scholars sat in a lecture chamber, and the subject was humanity. They were the brightest minds of their respective species. A Velthian with 3 brains and sapphire skin sat beside a crystalline silicate being whose body resonated with inner light. There was a Zephyr, whose form was barely bound by gravity itself, and a Corvian whose 4 arms gestured expressively as they spoke. They represented the cream of galactic youth, the future leaders, scientists, and philosophers of a civilization that spanned 17 star systems. And today they were learning about the species known as humans. Their instructor, the esteemed Professor Ixithan, stood before them with a demeanor of absolute authority. Ixithan was old by the standards of their species, with over 2,000 years behind them. They had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of stars, and the peculiar trajectory of a species called humanity. The Human Restriction Act, Professor Ixithan began, their voice carrying the weight of official decree, was established 463 cycles ago. It was a necessary measure, a protective measure, if you will. One of the students, a young Velthian named Kale, leaned forward with interest. Protective, Professor? Humanity is a carbon-based species with limited lifespan and fragile biological systems. What threat could they possibly pose that would warrant a galactic ban? A ripple of amusement moved through the chamber. The notion was, to them, absurd. Professor Ixithan's expression did not change. That is precisely the question I wish to address today. You see, the humans were restricted from galactic society not because they were dangerous to us, but because we feared what they might become, or perhaps what they already were. The students exchanged glances, the Zephyr being drifted slightly closer, its form shimmering with curiosity. Before the ban, Ixithan continued, humans were permitted limited access to intergalactic trade routes and diplomatic channels. They were observed, studied, and assessed alongside other emerging species. And what we found was troubling. Not to us, you understand. Troubling to the order we had established. The professor activated a holographic display, and a series of images flickered into existence. Earth, blue and green and beautiful, orbiting a yellow star. Images of human cities, human art, human culture. Humans are a young species, compared to the Velthians, who have known civilization for over 40,000 cycles, or the crystalline silicates, who have existed since before your sun ignited. Humans have only had organized society for a mere 6,000 of your standard cycles. They are infants, biological infants with short lives and fragile bodies. The students nodded, absorbing this information. And yet, Ixithan said, and something shifted in their tone. In those 6,000 cycles, they have accomplished something that we, with all our technological superiority and ancient wisdom, found deeply unsettling. The hologram changed. Now it showed footage, real footage, not from the restricted archives, not yet. This was permitted material. Humans building, humans creating, humans standing on the moon, humans sending probes to distant planets. They build with remarkable speed, the professor explained. They create with an almost reckless innovation. They push boundaries that we have long since settled. They dream impossibly large dreams. And most disturbing of all, they do this despite knowing, with a crystalline silicate student whose name was Veltheres, spoke up. Its voice was like the ringing of ancient bells. That seems inefficient, Professor. Why expend resources on projects that will not benefit them personally? An excellent question, Ixithan replied, but the answer reveals something about humanity that the Council found troubling. They do not work for themselves alone. They work for something they call the future, for their children, for their children's children, for species they will never meet, living in an age they will never see. They willingly sacrificed their own brief existence for abstract ideals and distant descendants. The Corvian, with all four arms crossed in a gesture of skepticism, spoke. "This sounds like mythology, Professor. Stories they tell themselves to romanticize labor." "Perhaps," Ixithan said. "But then we have footage." The professor continued, describing the circumstances that led to the Human Restriction Act. It had occurred during what humans called the contact period, when humans first made formal diplomatic contact with the broader galactic community. A human delegation had been permitted to visit the Grand Conference Station, a massive space installation where representatives from 100 different species gathered to discuss trade, science, and mutual development. The humans had been treated, by and large, with the condescension one might reserve for a talented but ultimately limited species. The Velthians found them physically weak. The Silicates found their consciousness too brief and fragmented to be truly meaningful. The Zephyrs found them cumbersome and bound by gravity in ways that seemed almost pitiable. Even the younger species saw in humanity something to be pitied, a spark of intelligence trapped in a body that would fail and die in mere decades. But then, something happened. There was an accident, a catastrophic systems failure on the station. A collision with an uncharted asteroid had damaged critical life support sectors. 17,000 individuals were on the station at the time, representing 73 different species. The station's automated systems attempted to seal off the sector. The protocols were clear: sacrifice the few to save the many. The massive bulkheads began their descent, ready to seal Sector 7 permanently and preserve the rest of the station. All the galactic species agreed it was the only logical choice. All except the humans. There were only 4 humans on the station. 4 humans against a failing life support system designed by technologies they did not understand, built from materials they had never worked with before, running on principles that were largely incomprehensible to their still young science. But one of those humans, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, a biologist and engineer from Earth, made a choice. She did what? Kale asked, leaning forward even more intently now. She went into the failing sector, Professor Ixithan said simply, while 17,000 others evacuated, while all the intelligent species on that station stood behind sealed doors watching the life support indicators drop into the red. Dr. Chen and her 3 human colleagues entered the most dangerous environment imaginable. Why? The Zephyr being asked, genuinely confused. The probability of success was infinitesimal, Ixithan confirmed. Then why? Veltharies asked. Because, Professor Ixithan said slowly, there were 17,000 people in that sector, and she could not accept their deaths. She simply could not. She could have left. Her teammate was urging her to leave. There was still time, but she did not move. Instead, she continued working. She stayed, Ixithan said, because the calculations showed that if she could just recalibrate the tertiary circuits, something she had learned how to do 15 minutes earlier by watching the automated station AI demonstrate it, she might bring enough of the life support online to keep people alive until the automated systems could fully restart. The students watched in horrified fascination as the bulkhead continued its descent. The bulkhead was seconds away, Ixithan narrated. When the tertiary circuits came online, it was not enough to fully restore the sector, but it was enough. Enough for people to survive the next 12 hours until proper repairs could be made. Enough for 17,000 individuals from species that had not lifted a finger to help, to live. The bulkhead stopped, halted by Dr. Chen's improvised fix, just meters above her position. And then, impossibly, she ran toward the exit, squeezing through the shrinking gap as the bulkhead continued its descent behind her. She barely made it through, her suit collapsing around her as she tumbled into the next sector. The footage showed other beings catching her, pulling her to safety. Medical personnel, aliens from a dozen different species, working frantically to keep her alive. She was suffering from rapid decompression, thermal shock, and oxygen deprivation. But she lived. Dr. Chan spent 3 months in medical suspension recovering from her injuries. Professor Ixithan explained. She experienced trauma that, frankly, most species would have died from. And when she woke up, do you know what she said? The students waited. She asked if everyone in Sector 7 had survived. Silence filled the lecture chamber. That was the moment, Ixithan continued, when the council made their decision to ban humanity from galactic society, to quarantine them on their homeworld, to cut off contact, to prevent them from spreading among the stars. But why? Kale asked, confused. She saved people. She performed a heroic act. Why would that warrant a ban? Precisely because it was heroic, Ixithan replied, and because we feared what a species that would do such things might become if allowed to spread among the stars. The students' confusion was evident. The Corvian spoke for them all. I don't understand, Professor. Are you saying that humans are too heroic? That we banned them because they helped us? Not because they helped us, Ixithan said carefully. Because they helped us at a cost to themselves, with no guarantee of benefit, and with no expectation of reward or recognition. They did it because the alternative, the death of innocent beings, was unconscionable to them. The professor paused, letting that settle. The council examined this incident extensively. They interviewed observers from every species present. They studied Dr. Chen's actions, her neural patterns, her genetic makeup, her culture. And what they discovered was this. Dr. Chen's behavior was not anomalous. It was not the result of some genetic mutation or individual peculiarity. It was cultural. It was inherent to humanity. What do you mean? Velthares asked. I mean, Ixithan said that across human history, across thousands of documented cases, humans regularly demonstrate a willingness to sacrifice themselves for strangers, for beings they have never met, for abstract principles, for honor, duty, compassion, and hope. The professor activated the display once more. You have been told that this restriction was necessary, that it was to protect others from humanity. But I believe the truth is more complex. The council feared what would happen if humanity, with their impossible combinations of fragility and ferocity, short lifespans and long-term thinking, physical weakness and mental flexibility, were allowed to expand among the stars. The Zephyr drifted backward, disturbed. You're saying the council was afraid of humans? Not of their weapons, Ixithan said, but of their potential, their ability to inspire, their capacity to create meaning in meaninglessness, their refusal to accept tragedy when action was possible. The students absorbed this. Kale began to understand. So they banned them to prevent them from spreading their ideas, their way of thinking. Perhaps, Ixithan confirmed, or perhaps because they recognized something in humanity that made them uncomfortable. A reminder of what we had forgotten in our long, efficient, rational civilizations. The professor stood quietly for a moment. Then they said, "Today, I am going to show you something. Something that has been restricted since the ban. Not by safety protocols, but by order of the council. Security clearance is normally required. But I have decided you are ready to understand." The professor's hands moved across the holographic interface. This is restricted footage from the archives. Raw video from human sources, recovered during the contact period. It documents humanity at its most profound and most confounding. It is difficult to watch, but I believe you need to see it. The footage began to play. It showed humans in hospitals sitting with the dying, humans caring for the sick, humans adopting orphans, humans mourning strangers who had died in distant tragedies. It showed humans working for no pay to build shelters for the homeless. It showed humans risking their lives to rescue animals from floods and fires. It showed humans standing against tyranny when silence would have been safer. It showed humans creating art and music and literature, not for profit, but for the pure expression of meaning. It showed a young human man, burned terribly in an industrial accident, being cared for by a team of medical professionals who attended to him for months, knowing he would never fully recover, but doing it anyway because his life had value. It showed humans marching against injustice, humans feeding those who were hungry, Humans teaching those who were ignorant with patience and kindness when they could have been doing something more profitable. It showed a human woman holding the hand of a stranger in a hospital bed, a person she had never met, simply because that person was alone and afraid. One after another, simple acts of profound compassion. Thousands of them. Humans making choices that had no evolutionary advantage, no survival benefit, no rational explanation. The students watched, transfixed, and then the footage shifted. It showed humans in conflict, humans in war, but it was different from what they expected. It showed humans not fighting for resources or territory, but for ideals. They fought to liberate the oppressed. They fought against tyranny. They fought knowing they might lose. They fought knowing they might die. It showed human soldiers protecting civilians. It showed human medics treating enemy wounded. It showed human commanders refusing to commit atrocities despite military advantage. It showed humans making it hard to win unjustly, making it so that victory came at a cost. And then, the most powerful footage of all. It showed Dr. Sarah Chen, recovered from her injuries, standing before a gathering of the species she had saved. The Velthians, the Silicates, the Zephyrs, the Corvians, all of them present to thank her. And Dr. Chen, standing before them, said something that was translated and displayed across the screen. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but somehow more profound. That's not heroism. That's just being human. And I would die for any of you in a heartbeat, not because I owe you anything, but because that's what humans do. We see others as us. We see their suffering as our suffering. And we can't live with ourselves if we don't try to help. The footage ended. The lecture chamber was silent. The silence stretched. No one spoke. The students were absorbed in contemplation. Finally, Kale looked at Professor Ixithan. Why are you showing us this, Professor? The ban is absolute. We're taught that contact with humanity is forbidden, that they are dangerous. Dangerous to what? Ixithan asked. To our peace? Perhaps. To our way of thinking? Certainly. To our comfortable understanding of what intelligence and civilization should look like? Absolutely. The professor moved closer to the students. The council banned humanity not because they would harm us militarily, but because they feared what would happen if their way of thinking, their insistence that all beings have value, that sacrifice for others is the highest good, that meaning matters more than survival, spread among the stars. Veltheres spoke, and its voice was resonant with understanding, because it would change us. Yes, Ixithan confirmed. It would change us profoundly. It would force us to reconsider how we live, how we treat one another, whether we have built our civilizations on principles we truly believe in, or merely on convenience. The Corvian's arms gestured in a complex pattern. So the ban is not about protecting us from humans. It's about protecting our way of life from their influence. That is my interpretation, Ixithan said, and I believe it is a fundamental mistake. The professor paused, looking at each student in turn. I have shown you this footage because I believe there is something in humanity that we have lost, or perhaps never had. Something that makes their brief lives, their fragile bodies, their mortal existence. Something that makes it all matter, deeply matter, in ways that transcend logic and biology and survival metrics. The professor moved to the window, looking out at the vast expanse of stars beyond the institute. Humanity is restricted from the galactic community. They are quarantined on their single world, unaware that they were once in contact with us, that they saved us, that they chose compassion over self-preservation. And they will likely never know that the galaxy fears them not for their strength, but for their capacity to make us remember what we forgot. The professor turned back to face the students. And that, I believe, is a tragedy. Kale stood. The others followed. It was a gesture of profound respect in their culture, to stand when hearing something that fundamentally altered understanding. What can we do? The young Velthian asked. The ban is absolute. The council would never lift it. That, Ixithan said, is a question each of you must answer. But I will tell you this. Eventually, humans will develop the technology to escape their world. They will reach for the stars. And when that day comes, the galaxy will have to choose. Will we accept them? Will we listen to them? Will we allow them to spread their radical notion that all beings have value, that sacrifice for others is noble, that there is something worth dying for besides yourself? The professor smiled, a subtle, knowing expression. And I suspect, Ixithan continued, that some of you will be in a position to make that choice, to decide what kind of galaxy we will be. Whether we continue in our orderly, efficient, rational way, or whether we allow ourselves to be changed by contact with a species that dares to ask us to be better than survival alone. The professor's final words echoed through the chamber as the students filed out, each lost in their own thoughts. Humanity asks us to care for those we do not know, to sacrifice for those who cannot repay us, to build for a future we will not see, to find meaning in brief moments of connection, to see in every being, no matter their species, their ability, their worth to us, something sacred and irreplaceable. The professor looked at the holographic image of Dr. Sarah Chen, frozen on the screen. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human, not as a distant concept, not as an abstract ideal, but as a living, breathing, powerful force that could not be contained by any ban, any quarantine, any protocol or law. Because what Dr. Chen embodied, what humanity represents, is not something you can legislate away. It is something that, once seen, can never be unseen. Once felt, can never be fully forgotten. The professor's voice softened to barely more than a whisper. The ban on humanity was meant to protect the galaxy from their influence. But I believe it will ultimately fail, because you cannot quarantine hope. You cannot contain compassion. You cannot restrict the power of beings who choose to matter, deliberately, in a universe that often seems designed to make nothing matter at all. If this story moved you, if it made you think about what truly separates civilizations from mere survival, if it made you reconsider what we mean by strength and intelligence and value, then subscribe for more stories from the stars, more tales of humanity's place in the cosmos, more reminders of what we can become when we choose compassion over comfort, when we sacrifice for strangers, when we dare to dream in the face of impossible odds. Because humanity's story is just beginning, and the galaxy, whether it is ready or not, will soon be forced to answer the question that has haunted them since the contact period. What do you do when you meet a species that simply refuses to accept that anything is impossible, if it means saving others? Thank you for listening. Until next time, may you find meaning in the stars.